Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today I'm in Rocklin, California, just stopping along the side of the road here to observe some undeveloped land in a very developed area, developed part of the world, very populated part of the world, but still a place that's a tribute and a testimony to God's creative power. You see the countryside and you're reminded that God has the cattle on 1,000 hills. I actually thought I heard a cow moving not too long ago, but anyway, today we're going to be having a look together at Psalm number 143. Let's go ahead and read that now. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my pleas for mercy. In your faithfulness answer me, in your righteousness. Enter not into judgment with your servant, for no one living is righteous before you. For the enemy has pursued my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me sit in darkness like those long dead. Therefore my spirit faints within me. My heart within me is appalled. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you have done. I ponder the work of your hands. I stretch up my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land. Answer me quickly, O Lord. My spirit fails. Hide not your face from me, lest I be like those who go down to the pit. Let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love, for in you I trust. Make me know the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. Deliver me from my enemies, O Lord. I have fled to you for refuge. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Let your good spirit lead me on level ground. For your name's sake, O Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness bring my soul out of trouble, and in your steadfast love you will cut off my enemies, and you will destroy all the adversaries of my soul, for I am your servant. You get the impression in reading the words of this psalm that the psalmist is facing a very dramatic situation in his life. The enemies are pursuing him, it says in verse number 3, and he finds himself sitting in darkness. He finds, it says in verse number 4, his soul sort of fainting within him. He feels no hopefulness in the situation. All he can do in this dark and hopeless situation is to meditate, it says in verse number 5, on the past, to remember the days of old and think about what God has done. He finds himself in that dark situation, stretching forth his hands out to God. He finds himself pausing, but even in his pausing, it says in verse number 6 that he paused. There's no relief that comes in verse number 7, but a desire for the Lord to answer him quickly. When you find yourself in a dramatic situation, of course you want the Lord to answer you quickly. But it's important that as much as the situation you are facing is clouding your judgment, clouding your vision, it's important in such a situation to not become a judge of God, to not place judgment upon God. And one of the things that this psalm teaches us, in as much as it shows the psalmist in a very difficult situation, it shows how he purposes his prayer so as to pray with humility. And again, I think that's the lesson that comes across in this song. How can I pray with humility? How can I come to God in a dire circumstance without casting judgment upon God? Well, first of all, of course, I have to commit to not judging God. And in verse number 2 it says, enter not into judgment with your servant, for no one living is righteous before you. When I read those words, the first thing that came to my mind was God's servant Job. In the course of Job's trials, there was a point when Job wanted to stand in judgment with God, and he felt he had a case. He felt that he could stand before God, argue his case, and that he would come out the victor in that trial. And of course, he finds out later that he was wrong to ever think that he could question God in the first place. The psalmist, perhaps realizing that, maybe even knowing the situation of Job, he says, I don't want to enter into judgment with you. I know that I'm not perfect. I know that I have my shortcomings, and therefore I know that you are God and that you are not me, and that I cannot pass judgment on you. First step to praying with humility. Second thing that we find the psalmist doing is, of course, as we said in verse 5, remembering what God has done. If you want to really keep yourself on that path of not judging God, remember that God has already shown you great graciousness. If not in your personal life, remember when we were studying Psalm 88 and 89, we reflected upon situations where people maybe experienced terrible things their entire life. But God, even in the terrible things that this world has to offer, has given a ray of shining hope in Jesus Christ and in salvation. And so again, God has done great things, and we have to meditate on those things and realize that God has goods in store for everyone who reaches out to Him. And so he commits to not judging God. He remembers what God has done. But number 3, to maintain humility, he realizes what is truly important in this situation. Is it that his problem ends, or is it that he finds and has fellowship with God? In verse number 6, it says, I stretch out my hands to you, my soul thirsts for you like a parched land. It doesn't say my soul thirsts for the solution to my problem. It says my soul thirsts for you. He desires God. And so we have to desire God more than we desire our problem to end. Number 4, to commit to a prayer of humility, we have to trust Him and claim Him as a refuge. In verse number 8, he says, let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love. He says in verse 9, I have fled to you for refuge. God has to truly be our refuge. If we see Him as greater than us and capable of offering protection for us, then we're, again, honoring Him as God and not elevating ourselves to His level. Number 5, even in this difficult circumstance, if we're going to maintain humility, then we have to be prepared to learn. God allows these things to happen to us so that someone can learn, and oftentimes that someone is us. In verse number 10, teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Let your good spirit lead me on level ground. He doesn't merely want deliverance from the problem. He wants to come out of the problem a better person. And so he says, God, teach me. Help me to know you better. Help me to know life better. Help me to know what way you would have me to go in this life. Ultimately then, if you want to pray in humility, you do the 5 things that we have described. You commit to not judging God. You remember what God has done. You desire God more than you desire your problem to end. You trust Him and claim Him as your refuge, and you are prepared from Him to learn and to be taught. But you can't pray with humility if you don't actually pray. And so in verses 1 and 11, it's driven home that you have to pray. But when you do these things, and when you pray in this manner, then you'll see what the psalmist sees. In verse 12, he sees the solution through faith. That's been something that we've seen throughout the Psalms. But I can tell you this about the Psalms and about prayer. You'll never see the solution in faith if you don't have faith in God. If you've elevated yourself to His level, if you're willing to cast judgment on Him for what He has allowed you to face, if you keep Him as God, then you can see the solution that He will provide. God is one who must be believed in, because if we believe in Him, He is a rewarder of those who believe in Him and diligently seek Him. I think you see that in the psalmist's words. I think you can see that in the life of people of faith throughout the Bible. And I hope and pray that it will be a part of your life when you're facing difficulties. And so, if you're facing a truly dramatic situation like the psalmist, you want God to answer you quickly, remember to pray with humility. And remember what the psalmist has taught you in this psalm. May God bless you today.